All across the great state of Iowa, it is the Simon Conway Show, and it is 4:36 on our Monday get-together. It is President's Day, and we've already established that you guys kind of don't really care anymore, which is sad. In studio with us, we have my friend, who I've known since 2011. Rick Santorum.
We've traveled together.
Yeah.
And
I know we have, yeah.
And been on the air many, many hours together from all over the world.
Many hours. I just heard a ding. Is that me? Yes, it probably was. Okay, also in studio, Mark Meckler. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? It's always good to be back with you. It feels like old home week when I come into your studio.
Right. It's great. It's a nice studio. I'm sure that there's some...
One of the nicest in the country. I've been in a lot of them.
Right. There's a lot of pokey radio studios, little small places.
Yeah, this is spacious.
Spread our wings, and well, it is the mighty WHO, our flagship of the stations you're on right now, and as I like to point out, the most decorated radio station in American history.
I think that's because you're here, right?
No, nothing to do with the 100 years almost history or Ronald Reagan, I'm sure. All right, well, look, you guys are in town together. You've been up at the State House?
I have.
And you're doing a town hall tonight. Because you think the answer to our problems is very interesting. I want to ask you, before we get to what you think the answer to our problems is, have you seen Marjorie Taylor Greene's solution today?
No.
It's not a trick question. She thinks the solution is a divorce. Red states and green states. It's funny, we were talking about Lincoln and a civil war. Red states and blue states. She thinks the answer to the fact that we predominantly hate each other is to separate.
Boy, I've heard this before.
Mm-hmm.
No, this is really the danger of not doing something to address what is the root of what she's talking about, which is the fact that you have a very diverse country.
Yep.
We've always had a very diverse country. We've always had a divided country. And there have been efforts in the past to separate this country because the divisions are great. But our founders created an opportunity for a federalist system to work. The problem today is that federalism isn't working because the federal government has become so powerful and is trying to force its will over a very diverse country. And we're finding big parts of that country saying no. And so the answer is separate, or better yet, and what we're suggesting is take some of that power out of Washington, allow states to be different, give them the power to, let California be a radical socialist republic if they want to be, but let Iowa be a good conservative moral values state that believes in liberty and opportunity. And within that context, they can live together.
Here's the problem with that, Mark Meckler, and I love Rick Santorum, by the way.
Both of us do.
No, really, he makes so much sense. Every time he's in here, he's like, man, that just makes sense. But here's the problem. The problem is all the states have been bribed, including this one. And we're now, we take literally billions of dollars from the federal government. They don't make anything. The only money the federal government has is money they forcibly removed from us or borrowed from China. We take that money, and it always comes with strings every single time. Here's the check, and sign on the dotted. This is what you have to do. And to me, it never made sense. And it makes less sense as each year passes because, as Rick just said, this is an all-powerful federal government now.
Look, I agree with that. And so one of the things we have to do is remove the federal government's ability to give the states money with strings attached. It's not just that. It goes further than that. On average, these are average numbers, but about 65% of every state's budget has some kind of federal strings attached to it. So we think we're voting for our own senators or our own members of the House, and we're getting 100% of our votes worth. No, we're actually getting about 35% of our votes worth. And so what we need to do is put constitutional structure in place that prevents the federal government from doing this. And I want to go back to Marjorie Taylor Greene's idea. Like, I understand. I mean, it sounds nice, and I like it in concept. I live in Texas, and Texas is a quote-unquote red state, except for Dallas, El Paso, San Antonio, Houston, Austin. I originally come from California. California is 85% geographically red, but it's a blue state. So what's a red state and what's a blue state? I don't think you could say that clearly.
Right. I don't think you can either. We're right now, we're sat in Des Moines.
Very blue.
It's a very blue city.
Right.
It makes no sense to me because you've got a red state that is doing remarkably well, and I can't get my head around why people would vote the other way in a state that's doing so well. Why would you want the other lot in? If we're this is part of the reason is teams. I don't play teams. I've never been on a team. I am proudly independent, and I am obviously a conservative, and I make no apology for that either, Rick Santorum. So, what's the big idea? How do we get ourselves out of this mess, Rick?
The founders gave us the answer. I mean, you always go back to sort of the basics, and the founders created a country where they believed in federalism. They believed in a relatively weak federal government, and allowing this huge country. At the time it was huge, but it's obviously much bigger than the 13 original colonies. And they realized that trying to have one government govern that huge amount was not possible. That the mountain states would be different than the coastal states and the plain states and everything. So they realized that, and so they provided mechanisms in the Constitution to keep the states strong and the federal government weak. Mm-hmm. One was the election of the appointment of senators by the state legislatures.
Yep.
Up until 1913. The state legislature in Iowa appointed the senator from Iowa, and they would go to Washington, D.C., and they would protect the rights of the states because that's what they were there to do. Yep. And if you look at the size of the federal government in 1913, it was nothing. It was absolutely nothing. And what's happened since the popular election of Senate, that was the 17th Amendment, was an amendment to the Constitution. People say, we don't need to mess with the Constitution. The Constitution has been messed with. Okay? Yeah. And part of it is the state legislatures themselves gave up that power. And in so doing, they allowed Washington to explode. The Supreme Court then came along and said, as you guys were talking about, education is an example. All sorts of money you get for education. The federal government has no right to pass laws that dictate education.
None.
How do they get around it? They don't. They pass laws and say, if you do this, we'll give you money. Or if you don't do this, we'll take money. Yep. And so it's not a matter that they can force the states to do it. They bribe the states to do it.
Literally.
Right? So that's how this government has exploded. People say, if they just live by the Constitution. Well, they actually are living by the Constitution, and we need to make some changes because they've figured out a way around the Constitution. And so that's what this is all about.
So, Mark Meckler, we live in times where I do not believe it would be possible to get an amendment to the Constitution passed by Congress to start with. It's just never going to happen. We are too divided. I'm not sure your way will work either, by the way, just putting that on the record. But you have another way. What is that other way?
Yeah, so the second clause of Article 5 of the Constitution says that when 2/3 of the states call for a convention, that's 34 states, they can gather and they can propose amendments. It takes 26 states of the 50 states to say they want to propose an amendment, and then that amendment goes, or amendments go out to the states for ratification. It takes 38 states to ratify. So this was intended by the founders as a way to route around a recalcitrant or misbehaving Congress that was no longer responsive to the people, and I think those are the times we clearly live in.
I don't disagree. Why is there so much opposition to this, Mark? Because, right here in Iowa, this is where we sit, the two Republican National Committee people hate this idea.
I'm going to say, honestly, I don't know, because when they say they hate this idea, they're standing side by side, literally, and this is going to sound outrageous, with every single leftist organization in the United States of America. They all signed a press release saying this is the worst thing that could happen to the progressive movement. When I say that, I want to name some names. It's Common Cause. It's Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. It's George Soros. It's La Raza. It's MoveOn.org. It's Daily Cause. So when you hear those committee people say that they're against this, they're standing with all of those organizations, and they're standing against the likes of Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity and Mark Levin and Ben Shapiro and Steve Deace, and I'm looking at Simon over here. They're standing against literally all the great nationally known conservatives I know. And so I don't really understand. And they're, by the way, parroting the exact same talking points of those organizations.
It is very strange. You got a town hall tonight, Rick. Where is it? What time is it?
It's at 7 o'clock at Franklin Junior High, and there's space available. Come see us and bring your questions. We had a town hall in Boise, Idaho, just a couple weeks ago. Mark and I did one, and we had about 400 people there, and it was a great conversation. And lots of folks come up saying, I didn't really understand it. I'll be honest with you, Simon. I was not for convention of states up until a couple of years ago. I was concerned about it, didn't understand it. And like a typical conservative, when you hear a new idea, it's never been done before, what's your initial reaction? Well, if it hasn't been done before, there's probably a good reason it hasn't been done, right? And that was my reaction until I took the time to study it. And the more I looked at it, the more I figured, you know what, these founders knew what they were talking about. Yeah, it's hard to do. You're right, Simon. It's really hard to do.
Yeah, it is.
It's hard to get 34 states. It's hard to get 38 states to ratify. That's the way it should be. It should be hard to change the Constitution. But the Democrats and the left have changed the Constitution by using the court to have this living, breathing Constitution. Well, we aren't going to change the Constitution back by conservative justices. We have to do it the right way, and that is having a broad consensus of the public support it.
All right. Well, smart move, by the way, having the town hall start after my show is off the air.
Yes, of course.
Very smart
Come
move.
by.
Thank you very much for popping by. We have a text line. You've probably seen some of these going through, but I just want to ask one question. Why isn't Santorum running for president, it says here?
Well, thank you. I would say thank you, Mom, but she passed away a couple of years ago. But maybe it's my brother or sister writing. It's certainly no friend of mine, that's for sure, because any friend of mine would know that my wife would probably divorce me and or kill me if I did.
Yeah. Been there, done that.
Yeah.
More than once. Well, gentlemen, thank you very much for coming in. I really do appreciate it.